Welcome back to Real Estate 101. Today we're going to continue our discussion on home inspections and talk about basement problems and solutions. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Allan Spisak of ACISS Home Inspections. Allan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Joe. Great to be back again here with you.
All right, Allan. So I want to start today's show and talk about leaks in the house. Now, usually when a home leaks, most of the time it's from the basement. What are some common issues that can arise in a basement that helps, cause these leaks?
Well, this is the big thing. The basement, it's your best friend, but it's also your worst enemy, because if you're a home buyer, you don't want basement leaks. And if you're a home seller, you don't want basement leaks. So you can get water coming through windows, through cracks, through pinholes, through step cracks. So this whole basement issue, it's a big concern for a lot of people, Joe.
Okay, so a lot of the older structures were built with stone and brick. Do you think that is that part of the reason why, as they deteriorate over time, that there's leaks in basements?
Well, Joe, the old foundations were never really meant to be waterproof. They were structures to hold up the house. So what would happen is, over a period of time, people would use that space underneath the house, which was only a couple of feet, for storage. And then over a longer period of time, they dug it out to make more storage room. And the original stone and the original brick foundations were never really waterproof.
All right. So what about concrete block foundations? Those, that was used a lot too.
Yes, that was the next progression for basements. So the stone they found was porous, the brick, it was better, but the concrete block was the next generation of basements. However, Joe, each basement block has 4 sides that can crack and leak.
Okay, so I remember in a previous episode in one of our past seasons, you mentioning that downspouts sometimes also cause problems for basements. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Home Inspection 101. Make sure your downpipes don't go under the ground. Make sure they extend on the surface about 4 to 6 feet away from your house.
All right, so how else can water get into a basement?
Well, the basement is below grade. And what happens is we have water that's below the grade. So when the house is built, it's built with weeping tiles to try to get that water directed away from the foundation. However, you can have sometimes what's called subsurface hydraulic pressure. And that's where the water is actually trying to force its way up underneath your house into your house. If you've got that problem, you really need a basement specialist to come out and figure out how to get that water out.
Okay, let's talk about the settlement of the house, because we know, the builders, when they pour concrete, it takes a while to cure, and over time it settles. What happens over time with the settlement of the house? Does that also contribute to leaks?
Typically, a settlement doesn't occur. What occurs is the concrete actually dries out and it shrinks. So in poured concrete foundation, cracks are very common.
But settlement does occur sometimes, right?
Yes, it's not typical, but it does happen. And you can see in some of the pictures here, the results are that the brick sits on the foundation wall. So if the foundation wall sinks, you can actually see settlement up above in your exterior brick cladding. Okay,
so because we're talking about settlement and foundation, these are sitting on the footings. What happens when the footings are sinking?
What happens is that the footings can sink if A, you've got water that's there that's not draining away, so it softens the soil, or if your weeping tile breaks, the erosion of the soil under your footing can cause a drop, as you can see in that photograph there. So the proper way to fix it, Joe, is you have to dig down underneath, and that's quite a ways down, and you have to underpin that footing.
All right, so we've been in basements together. You've come with me, obviously, to do inspections for clients. We not all the time, but the odd time we'll see some cracks in foundations. Usually they're vertical cracks. What about horizontal cracks?
Well, when we have a horizontal crack in a concrete block foundation wall, the pressure from outside is causing that concrete wall to bow inwards typically, and that is a structural crack. Even if it's very fine, a bowed wall is a structural crack, and that can scare a lot of people away. But there's new technologies now to fix those horizontal cracks.
Okay, so is excavation the only way to fix concrete block problems?
No, there's new technology out there now where they don't have to actually excavate around the wall. So if we take a look at the following photographs, you'll see on this block wall, we've got large steel plates, and in the center of them is a threaded rod. So what they're trying to do now is they're going to provide a force to actually pull that wall straight from when it was bowed. The next photograph, you can see the threaded rods that are going out into the soil. Typically, they don't have to excavate, but this was a severe situation. And again, on the next photograph, you'll see how the soil, the mud had fallen in and collapsed that block wall. But what they typically do is dig out about 15 to 16 feet from the house, and they put another metal plate in this pit. And there you can see the threaded rod with the metal plate in the pit. And then what they do is they tighten that nut up, and it pulls that block wall straight. And in the animation there, you can see exactly the whole process.
All right, so in your experience, what causes the biggest problems with seepage?
Concrete blocks are prone to slow seepage, and often you can't even see it if the materials in the basement are covering all that concrete block.
Drywall, studs, all that stuff.
Raised wood flooring, and it can cause a lot of damage underneath there that we can't see. So one of the tools that we do use is a moisture meter, and we also use infrared thermography. So if you go take a look at this picture here, you see the one where the wall has been torn apart?
All right.
I was called into a condo apartment where one of the condos above had leaked. And the contractor was removing the drywall, but the lady wasn't satisfied. He'd removed all of the damaged and wet drywall. So if you take a look at the next photograph, you'll see the infrared thermographic picture. So what that does is it gives you a visual picture of the temperature of the surface. So it's not actually showing us water, it's showing the temperature. So then what we do is I get the moisture meter out. You can see the picture of the moisture meter there. That shows that the material is actually 99% wet. So then what I did for that young lady was I drew a diagram of the rest of the material that the contractor needed to remove to make sure that all the wet material had been taken away.
All right, so leaks in a home can potentially become a major problem and cost a lot of money to fix. So how do we keep water out?
Typically, it was excavation and waterproofing the outside of the house, which is rather expensive. But again, we have new technology. We have what's called an interior weeping tile system. So with this system, a contractor comes in and he'll dig a perimeter trench on the inside of the house. They have to cut that concrete floor, and then what they'll do, you can see in the photographs, they put a weeping tile on the inside of the foundation wall by the footing, cover it with gravel, and they run a membrane on the inside of the foundation wall down to the weeping tile. This way, any water that's coming through that foundation wall is diverted down to the weeping tile, which then discharges that water either to a sump pump or right into the floor drain.
Okay, so obviously that's cheaper than excavating. How much cheaper?
Well, what I tell people is this type of system, you need to budget about $5,000 a wall.
A wall?
Yeah, a wall. So it is cheaper than excavating around the house, but it's still a costly process. So remember, concrete blocks, if you're buying a house with concrete blocks, you really need to make sure that the basement's dry.
Okay, you also mentioned before that concrete sometimes, as it's curing, it dries out and shrinks. How does that happen?
Yes, so nowadays, your most common basement is poured concrete. And as that concrete, the water in that concrete evaporates and dries, the concrete can crack. So builders are wrapping the foundations with a membrane, and they're hoping that that membrane will keep the water out. In most cases it does, but not always. So now there's a new process to fix cracks in the poured concrete wall called injection.
All right, so is it common today for all new home builds to have this foundation membrane and a weeping tile on the exterior.
Yes, it is, because what the builders want to do is they want to minimize the risk of having any basement leak warranties that they have to come back and repair.
All right.
So for a minimal cost of wrapping that foundation, they're going to do it on almost every house they build. It's very common.
All right, but I've seen, some homes that have the membrane and the weeping tile, down there near the footing, and they still leak.
Yes, even with the membrane, even with weeping tile, poured concrete foundations can still leak. So the new process of injection with either polyurethane foam or epoxy resin is the most common basement repair we see nowadays. And it's a very simple process, as you can see from the diagram. Injection ports are either drilled or epoxied over the crack directly, and then starting at the bottom, the material is injected in the first port, it fills the void, and subsequently you go up to the next port and the next until that whole void is filled. Now the polyurethane foam, it expands 5 times its volume, so it actually makes its way through the crack into the outside of the foundation wall as well.
All right, so there's 2 of them, obviously, epoxy and polyurethane. For somebody who's having a leak, which one do they use? Which one do they go with? What do you recommend?
So what we do is we go in and we investigate the crack and we see how big it is. So your typical crack, something you could fit a dime or a nickel into, a couple of millimeters thick, typically a polyurethane foam, because it gets in there, it expands, as I said, it fills that whole volume. However, if you have a very, very, very fine crack, a hairline crack, then typically we would recommend the epoxy resin. The epoxy resin is more of a liquid that will get into that crack, and the manufacturer tells us that once that epoxy gets into the crack, it bonds the cement together stronger than the cement itself.
All right, so I'm looking at these pictures here of this process. These tubes that are in the wall, what do you do with them? You just leave them there?
You can do basically whatever you want. The injector tubes are just there to allow the material to get into the crack. After the material is solidified, so the polyurethane foam typically will solidify in 20 minutes, but it really cures in 24 hours. The epoxy resin, the same thing, another 24 hours. If you need to, you can cut or knock those tubes off. They serve no further purpose. Or you can just leave them there and just put your insulation over top of it when you finish your basement.
All right, Allan. So any last tips for viewers and listeners on helping them prevent leaks? Is there anything they can do right now to help them prevent leaks in their basement?
Number 1 is grading. Make sure your ground always slopes away from your house so the water will flow away naturally. And then again, what we talked about with the downspouts, make sure they're pushing the water away from the house. And lastly, if you have window wells protecting your basement windows, make sure the ground below the window well is deep enough so that if the window well gets full of water, it doesn't actually come in through your basement window. So 3 main tips.
All right, so I know that ACISS doesn't only offer home inspections. You guys also do offer this service where you help repair cracks in foundations. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about it?
So if someone has a poured concrete foundation wall and it has a crack and it's either leaking or you need the crack fixed to sell your house, you can call our company. We'll come out, give you a free estimate, and we can usually get to your house and fix that crack within 48 hours so that you can either get that leak stopped or get the crack fixed so that you can sell your house.
All right, Allan, great stuff. Thanks for coming on today's show. It was a fascinating topic, and looking forward to seeing what our next one is going to be.
Thanks very much. And remember, you can call our office from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. 7 days a week at 905-633-8219.
All right, Allan, good stuff.
Thanks, Joe. It's been great.
All right, so if you're looking for a top home inspector, get in contact with Allan Spisak at ACISS Home Inspections. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, comment, like, and share our videos. I'm Joe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.